Hello, everyone, and welcome to this session. Trend Microvision 1 contains a number of different layers that each add value to the overall threat detection and response story. Let's take a look at what each individual layer contributes to the overall picture to help complete the puzzle. First, the endpoint. Most attacks ultimately involve the user's devices. Either the user clicked on something or the endpoint got compromised via a drive-by download, etc. But ultimately, the question you want to be able to answer is what happened on that endpoint and how did it propagate? But you also have endpoints that are unmanaged that you can't install an agent on. Maybe they're legacy, maybe they're a third-party contractor that has to plug into your network that you don't own and control. Or maybe you have IoT or OT devices that you can't install the agent because it would put them out of vendor compliance. Ultimately, you need visibility into how the attacker is moving across the organization, and is there things like CNC communication or data exfiltration. You need to be able to see exactly what's going on the network, and ultimately, if things are being stolen, they have to be stolen over a network connection. Email is another key value layer or key layer that provides a lot of value, specifically because email is the number one attack vector. One key question is who else received this email? Did it go to everyone in the organization or just this one specific executive? Are there compromised accounts sending internal emails? Did an attacker get access to one account and then use that as a trusted source to spread the malware internally? And then finally, cloud and workload security, which is a business critical applications, which ultimately is where most organizations have their gold stored. You need to be able to correlate the data from more than just EDR and just from the servers, because we have things like containers and serverless that don't have the persistence that a traditional VM or workload would have. And you have to have visibility across those to complete the puzzle completely. Now, let's take a look at what this looks like from the demo perspective in the console. So if we look at an endpoint example before we had EDR, where we just had detection or the prevention layer, here we can see the Trend Micro dashboard, and we can see that we had a detection for a specific file, in this case, a PDF that was masquerading as a link file. Now, this detection shows you can see what user, what system, but you really can't see much more beyond that from that set of data alone. Now let's take a look at what this looks like when we add in EDR data. So collecting all the telemetry from the endpoint, like the network connections, the process telemetry, etc. And suddenly this picture becomes a lot more complete. We see the original event, which was that detection, but now we see it also had some uncommon PowerShell parameters and also had a rarely accessed web domain. So now we can see that the puzzle is starting to come together, that while, yes, there was a file that was detected, it also was using PowerShell to communicate with some rare and unseen domains. But let's go back and add some more layers now. Let's add email, the network, the cloud workload visibility. And suddenly now the picture actually becomes complete. We see the possible spear phishing link that came in at the start. We can see the subject line for it. We can see who all received it. But then we also have all the data that we saw before. So we have that detection event where it was clicked on and executed. We have the PowerShell commands that were executed. And then we have the domain and the network traffic that's been enriched by the network sensor to be able to see additional details about it, including additional IPs, etc. So ultimately, what happened is by adding each of these new layers, we added more correlation opportunity. We added faster detection because of all those different steps. And ultimately, we had the broadest visibility across all the different tactics and techniques that were used in this specific example attack to see exactly what happened. But each layer, while it helps with the detection story, ultimately helps with the response story as well. Because as obviously, R in XDR is the response. So if we go back to our puzzle and we look at the different layers again, the endpoint, for example, contributes remote shell, being able to interrogate the endpoint and run commands on it to see and pull additional information. You can collect the file from the endpoint for deeper analysis through malware automation tools or sandboxing technologies. Endpoint isolation to get that endpoint off the environment or off the network while you're investigating it. On email, you have the ability to quarantine and delete an email, block the sender so that you don't get email from that malicious user anymore. At the network layer, we can block hashes, we can block IP addresses and domain names. And then on the cloud workloads, we can have the capabilities like remote shell and collecting file without impacting the revenue generating applications. If we go back to our demo console, here you can see the incident view, and this was introduced about a month ago. So if this looks new to some of you, to our existing customers, this did come out about a month ago. And what this does is this takes multiple workbenches and correlates them one level higher into an incident. So here you can see all the techniques and tactics. You can see all of the different workbench IDs that are associated that have all been correlated into this one larger single attack. And if we go to the top, we can click on different tabs to see the incident timeline. So we can see each individual event. We can see the impact scope, so what systems, servers, users were all involved. And then we can also see all the highlighted objects here. And if you haven't seen the screen before, it may look like there's a lot of text on here, a lot of random text. But actually, if you look close, that is a encoded PowerShell command being run. So actually seeing that, to me, is actually something that I may want to drill down further into, because clearly, while not necessarily malicious, encoding things in PowerShell is something that definitely should be looked at a little closer when it has this other information around it. In this case, the incident designation by the platform. But if you scroll down in this list, you can see it's not just process data. We also see file paths. We see IPs, registry entries, all in one view. So if we go back to the Alert tab next, and we actually drill down into a workbench now, we can see that on the workbench, specifically this one for credential dumping, we have response actions that vary based on what we clicked on. So if we right-click on the Creeper endpoint, for example, we will see we have the ability to do a remote shell. If we right-click on the reg.exe, we can collect that file. If we right-click on a URL or an IP in this case, we have the ability to add it to the suspicious objects list where it can then be blocked or logged going forward. Now we can also go back and look at another workbench. In this case, we'll look at the one labeled possible APT attack. This one contains additional items, in this case, email and network data. If we right-click on the email, we have the ability to quarantine the message or delete it. We right-click on the URL, we have the ability to add it to the block list. And then when we click on another endpoint, we have the ability to isolate it. So what you can see here is, depending on what type of item you're interacting with or what node you're interacting with, we have a contextually aware menu that lets you take specific response actions based on what exactly you're clicking on. And ultimately, we know customers need more than just response actions. They need the ability to track the status of these incidents. So we support that with a simple flagging system that is fully API integrated, as well as a notes capability like you see here. So I can add notes as I'm handing this off to another analyst. This can also be completely interacted with via your ticketing system. So if you want to push a note into Vision One via API, you can. And if you want to pull that note out and sync it with your ticketing system, you can via API today. And with that, I hope you have seen that each layer adds additional detection as well as response capabilities to ultimately help you see more and respond faster. And with that, I'd like to return it back to our hosts.